I used to believe the past was something you could fold up and put away, like a dress you outgrew, tucked in a box at the back of the closet. But that night, when the phone rang and a girl's trembling voice called me, "Mom," I realized the past isn't just behind you. It can slip through the cracks, crawl into your house, and curl up at your feet while you sleep. You can lie to yourself, but the past will find its way home. If you're new here, you're watching Women Unwritten, the place where our stories stop being polite and start being true. I should start at the night it all came undone. The clock read 1:13 a.m. I was sitting up in bed, nursing a mug of chamomile, waiting for my husband Alan to come home. He said he was at work late again, third time that week. I believed him, mostly because not believing him meant admitting something I wasn't ready to face. The house was silent except for the hum of the fridge and the faint tick of the old clock in the hallway, the one Alan's mother, or so he said, had given us as a wedding gift. I never met her. Alan always said he was alone in the world, just me and him against everything. I liked that story. It made me feel chosen, special. It made our little life together feel precious and rare. But that night, the phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. At that hour, nothing good ever comes. But something told me to pick up. I pressed the phone to my ear. All I heard at first was shaky breathing, then a whisper. "Mom?" It was a voice, soft and afraid. It was the kind of voice you hear in a dream or a memory. My heart punched against my ribs. "You have the wrong number," I said, but my words came out strangled. "Please," she begged. Am I safe to talk? Is he with you?" Her words made no sense, but the way she said them, the way her voice cracked, made something sharp twist inside me. You're watching Women Unwritten. Tap like and subscribe so more voices get heard. I tried to keep my tone steady. "Who is this?" She went silent. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, she said, "He told me you were dead." The line went dead. I sat frozen, phone clutched in my hand, staring into the dark. "He told me you were dead." My mind began to race. I wanted to call Alan, but my hands wouldn't move. I wanted to tell myself it was a prank, a wrong number, some kind of sick joke. But her voice, the way she said, "Mom," it rattled through me. There was something familiar in it, something I couldn't place. I heard myself whisper into the empty room. "Who are you?" The next morning, Alan came home just as the sun was rising. He looked tired, but not guilty. Not exactly. He set down his briefcase, kissed me on the forehead, and asked if I'd slept. I lied and said yes. He made coffee, humming softly, as if nothing in the world was wrong. I watched him, looking for a crack, a tell. He noticed. "You're quiet," he said. "Just tired," I answered, forcing a smile. I wanted to ask him if he'd ever lied to me, if there was anyone out there who might call me Mom. But I couldn't find the words. So I let him leave for work, and I sat in the kitchen, replaying the call over and over in my mind. By noon, I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe a runaway or a scam. People do strange things when they're desperate. But the feeling wouldn't go away. All day, I jumped every time the phone buzzed. I started to notice things I'd never questioned before. Alan's late nights, the way he never talked about his childhood, the fact that there were no photos of him before college, all the gaps in his stories. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet. At 2:08 a.m., the phone rang again. This time, I answered on the first ring. "Hello?" A long pause. Then, "Please, I need your help." Her voice was raw, urgent. "Who are you?" I demanded. "My name is Hannah," she whispered. "He said you were gone, but I found you." She was crying now, breath hitching. "I don't know where else to go. I'm sorry. Please, please don't tell him I called." I felt cold all over. "Tell who? Alan?" A gasp. "Don't say his name. He can hear everything. My mind reeled. Where are you? She started to say something, then the line went dead again. I sat in the dark, the air heavy with secrets. I realized I was shaking. I wanted to call Alan, confront him, scream at him until he gave me answers. But a part of me was afraid of what I'd find. The next morning, I found Alan in the kitchen, buttering toast. He smiled at me, so normal it made my skin crawl. I had the strangest dream last night, I said, watching his face. Someone called me Mom. Isn't that weird? He didn't miss a beat. Probably a wrong number. People do that sometimes. He shrugged, took a bite of toast, but for a split second, his hand trembled. That tremor was all I needed. My heart knew what my mind refused to see. Alan was hiding something. Something big. I spent the day in a fog, the world muffled around me. I called the number back, but it went straight to voicemail. No message, no explanation. That evening, Alan was late again. I paced the living room, phone in hand, hoping the girl would call back, hoping she wouldn't. At midnight, the doorbell rang. I froze. Who rings a doorbell at midnight? I crept to the window and peeked through the curtain. There was a girl standing on the porch, thin and shivering, clutching a battered backpack. My heart stopped. She looked about 17. Her hair was tangled, her eyes wide and terrified. She looked up at the window, and for a moment, I saw myself, not as I am now, but as I was at 17, raw and afraid. I opened the door, and she flinched. It's okay, I said softly. You're safe here. She hesitated, then stepped inside. She smelled like rain and cold air. We sat in the kitchen, silent. I poured her tea. She wrapped her hands around the mug like it was the only thing keeping her tethered. My name is Hannah, she said finally. I nodded, waiting. She looked up at me, her eyes shining with tears. He lied to you, she whispered. He lies to everyone. My throat tightened. Who is he, Hannah? She shook her head. You know who? I tried to steady my voice. Why did you call me Mom? She stared at the table, silent. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out a photograph. She slid it across the table. It was a picture of a woman. Younger than me, but with my eyes, my hair. She stood next to Alan, smiling. That's my mother, Hannah whispered. He said she died when I was a baby, but I know the truth. I heard him talking about you. I saw your picture. You're her, aren't you? I stared at the photograph, my mind spinning. The woman looked like me, but she wasn't me. Still, the resemblance was uncanny. My skin prickled. I'm not your mother, I said gently. Hannah's face crumpled. Then why do you look just like her? Why do you live here? He said he had no one, but you're here. You're with him. I reached across the table and took her hand. I don't know what's going on, I admitted, but I want to help you. She looked up at me, hope flickering in her eyes. Will you keep me safe? I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. We sat there in silence, the weight of unspoken things pressing down on us. Somewhere in the house, the old clock ticked on, counting down the seconds until everything changed. That was the night my world began to unravel. That was the night I realized the man I loved, the man I thought I knew, was a stranger. And whatever secrets he was hiding, they were about to crash into my life, whether I was ready or not. Women Unwritten, the night. My husband's sister called me Mom. Everything I knew about my family was a lie. Part 2. Docs. The air in the kitchen felt thin, like we were both holding our breath, waiting for the house to decide which way to tilt. Hannah kept her gaze locked on the mug in her hands, as if the steam could answer questions neither of us dared to ask. I watched her. The way her shoulders hunched, the way her fingers trembled just slightly, the way she flinched every time the pipes creaked or the fridge kicked on. It made me ache. It made me angry too. Angry at Alan, at myself for not seeing it sooner, at whatever twisted story had brought this girl to my door in the middle of the night. I wanted to tell her it would all be okay, that she was safe now, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I asked, "When did you last see him?" She hesitated, then glanced at me, her eyes wary. "Yesterday. He came to where I live. He left money, told me to stay away from this house. Said you'd hurt me if I came here." Her voice broke. "He's always telling me things that don't make sense, always changing the story." My jaw clenched. I tried to remember a time when Alan had seemed even remotely capable of this kind of deception. But my mind came up blank. There was only the man I'd built in my head, the man who read the paper in the mornings and laughed at my terrible puns, who bought me sunflowers when he knew I was sad. I thought I knew him. I thought I'd seen everything. But looking at Hannah, I realized I'd only seen what he wanted me to see. "Where's your mother now?" I asked softly. A tear slid down Hannah's cheek. "She died, or at least that's what he said. But I found her journals. She wrote about wanting to leave, about being afraid. And then one day, she was gone. He told everyone she was sick, that she didn't make it. But..." She looked up at me, desperate. "I don't know what's real anymore." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll figure this out together," I promised. "I won't let anyone hurt you." She nodded, her lower lip trembling. "I just don't want to go back. Not ever." We sat in silence, the house creaking and settling around us like an old animal. My mind spun with questions. Who was Hannah's mother? Why did she look so much like me? And what was Alan hiding from both of us? After a while, Hannah's eyelids drooped. She was so young, just a child under all the fear. I led her to the guest room, tucked her in, and sat beside her until her breathing slowed and deepened. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, and for a moment, I saw myself again. Not just in her face, but in the way she clung to hope despite everything. When I finally went back to my own room, the bed felt colder than ever. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for Alan's footsteps on the porch, for the sound of a key in the lock. But the night passed quietly, and when dawn crept through the curtains, I found myself dreading the moment he'd walk through the door. By the time Alan came home, Hannah was still asleep. I met him in the kitchen, pouring coffee, pretending nothing was wrong. I watched him as he moved around the room, looking for signs, a flicker of guilt, a nervous glance. But he just smiled and asked if I wanted pancakes. I forced a smile, my stomach churning. "You were gone a long time last night." He shrugged. "Work's been busy. Some things I had to handle. You know how it is." I sipped my coffee, watching him over the rim. "You ever think about your family? About the people you left behind?" He paused, just for a moment, then shook his head. "Not really. That's all ancient history." I pressed on, my voice steady. "You ever wish things had been different?" He looked at me, something dark flickering in his eyes. "No point in wishing. The past is the past." I wanted to scream at him, to demand the truth, but Hannah was still in the house. I couldn't risk a confrontation, not yet. After breakfast, Alan left for work. I waited until his car disappeared down the street before waking Hannah. She looked pale and drawn, but there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Is he gone?" she whispered. I nodded. "For now. But we have to be careful." She sat up, hugging her knees to her chest. "What are we going to do?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I needed to find out the truth. About Hannah, about Alan, about everything. I told her we'd take it one step at a time. We spent the day piecing together what little she knew. She told me about the small apartment where she lived with a woman she called Aunt Carol, about the nights Alan would show up with envelopes of cash and cryptic warnings. She showed me the journals her mother had left behind, battered notebooks filled with looping handwriting, pages torn out, words scratched over and rewritten. I read the entries, my heart pounding. There were mentions of fear, of him watching, of plans to run. Over and over the same phrase appeared. If anything happens to me, find her. Find her. I looked at Hannah. Did your mother ever say who her was? Hannah shook her head. I always thought it meant me, but now I'm not so sure. A chill ran down my spine. What if it was me? What if, somehow, my life was tangled up in this girl's story in ways I couldn't imagine? Late in the afternoon, I heard Alan's car in the driveway. Panic shot through me. I told Hannah to stay in the guest room, to lock the door, and not come out unless I called her. Alan walked in, setting his briefcase down with a thud. He looked tired, but there was an edge to him, a restlessness I hadn't noticed before. Rough day? I asked, forcing a smile. He nodded, rubbing his eyes. You have no idea. I studied him, searching for cracks in his mask. You ever wonder what it would be like to just start over? Leave everything behind and become someone new? He looked at me sharply. Why would I want to do that? I shrugged, pretending to sip my tea. Sometimes I think about it, how easy it would be to just disappear. He watched me, suspicion flickering in his eyes. Is there something you're not telling me? I shook my head, too quickly. No, just a thought. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned away. I'm going to take a shower. As soon as he was upstairs, I crept to the guest room. Hannah was curled up on the bed, clutching a pillow. He's here, she whispered, eyes wide. I nodded. Just stay quiet. I'll keep you safe. The minutes crawled by. Every sound seemed amplified. The rush of water in the pipes, the creak of the floorboards, Alan's footsteps overhead. When he finally came downstairs, he seemed calmer, almost normal. But I could feel the tension radiating off him, thick and electric. That night, after Alan went to bed, I sat in the living room, clutching one of Hannah's mother's journals. I flipped through the pages, looking for anything that might explain the connection between us. And then I found it. A photograph, tucked between the pages. It was old and faded, but unmistakable. There was Alan, younger, standing next to a woman who looked just like me. And in the corner, barely visible, was a little girl with Hannah's eyes. My hands shook as I turned the photo over. On the back, in neat handwriting, it said, For Emma. If you ever find her, tell her the truth. Emma. My name. My blood ran cold. I stared at the photo, my mind spinning. How could this be? How could Hannah's mother know my name, know who I was, years before I ever met Alan? Suddenly, everything felt wrong. My life, my marriage, the story I'd told myself about who I was. I thought about the little ways Alan had steered me away from questions about his past. The way he'd always insisted we move every few years, never putting down roots. What if I wasn't just a bystander in this story? What if I was the reason for all of it? I clutched the photograph to my chest, tears stinging my eyes. I thought about Hannah, sleeping fitfully in the next room. I thought about her mother, terrified and alone, trying to leave a message for someone she'd never met, or someone she knew all too well. I realized, with a sickening jolt, that I didn't know who I was anymore, or who Alan was, or what he was capable of. But I knew one thing for certain. I had to find out the truth, no matter what it cost. Women Unwritten, the night. My husband's sister called me Mom. Everything I knew about my family was a lie. Part 3. Docs. When morning came, I felt like I'd aged a decade overnight. My hands shook as I made coffee, my mind replaying the discovery of that photograph over and over. The handwriting on the back, my name, stared up at me from the kitchen table, silent and accusing. Hannah emerged from the guest room, bleary-eyed but a little less frightened. She glanced at me, searching my face for answers I still didn't have. I handed her a mug and tried to smile, but my lips barely moved. Alan was already gone, leaving a note by the coffee pot. Running errands, back late. I read it 3 times, trying to detect some hidden meaning. Every word felt like a lie. I turned to Hannah. "Do you know where this picture was taken?" I asked, showing her the photograph again. She shook her head. "No, I don't remember anything before I was 6 or 7. Aunt Carol always said we moved a lot." I traced the edges of the photo, feeling the old paper bite at my fingertips. "Do you know if your mom ever talked about someone named Emma?" Hannah hesitated. "She had a necklace with that name on it once. I asked her about it, and she just said, 'Emma is someone I loved and lost.' I thought maybe it was a friend, or a sister." A cold chill crept up my spine. I pressed my palm to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. The walls felt like they were closing in, heavy with secrets. I made a decision. "We need to find Aunt Carol. She might know more." Hannah's shoulders tensed. "She's not really my aunt. Just someone who helped take care of me when Mom was gone. But I know where she lives." It was risky, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that Carol might be the missing piece. We left the house after lunch, locking the door behind us. The air outside felt brittle, like the world was holding its breath. We drove in silence, Hannah staring out the window, twisting her hands in her lap. The city blurred by, gray sidewalks, tired storefronts, strangers bundled against the cold. I kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, seeing flashes of myself at that age. All nerves and hope, waiting for someone to tell me what to do. Carol's building was a crumbling brick walk-up on the edge of town. We climbed the stairs, my heart pounding with every step. Hannah knocked, 3 quick raps. The door opened a crack. Carol peered out, eyes wary. She was older than I expected, with silver streaks in her dark hair and deep lines around her mouth. "Hannah?" she whispered, surprise and fear mingling in her voice. Hannah nodded, stepping back so Carol could see me. "This is Emma." Carol's eyes widened. For a moment she seemed frozen. Then she opened the door wide and ushered us in, glancing nervously up and down the hallway. Inside, the apartment was neat but sparse. Old photographs crowded the walls, most of them black and white, faces I didn't recognize. Carol gestured for us to sit. "I never thought I'd see you here," she said, her gaze flicking from Hannah to me. "He'll be looking for you, you know." I felt my pulse quicken. "Carol, I need you to tell me the truth. Who was Hannah's mother? How did she know me?" Carol hesitated, wringing her hands. "Her name was Lila. Lila and I grew up together. She met Alan when she was barely 20. He swept her off her feet, charming, generous. But he was always secretive, always running from something. Lila changed after she met him. She became quiet, scared. She'd call me in the middle of the night, whispering that she didn't feel safe." I swallowed hard. "But why my name? Why did she write for Emma on the back of that photo?" Carol looked at me, her eyes softening. "Lila talked about you a lot. She said you were the only person who ever made her feel brave, back in college. She wanted to find you, but Alan wouldn't let her. He said you were dangerous, that you'd ruin everything. I always thought it was just jealousy. But then Lila disappeared, and Alan told everyone she died in an accident. I never believed him." My head spun. "I never met Lila. I don't remember her." Carol nodded. "That's what's so strange. Lila said you were unforgettable. She kept a box of letters from you, dozens of them. She said you were her anchor, her reason for believing things could get better." I tried to remember. College was a blur. Years of chasing grades, jobs, boys who never called back. I had friends, acquaintances, but no one named Lila stood out in my mind. Still, the certainty in Carol's voice unnerved me. Hannah reached over, squeezing my hand. Maybe you just forgot. Or maybe he made you forget. The idea sounded ridiculous, but something about it felt true. Alan was always so careful, so controlling about our past, our memories, the stories we told ourselves. Carol brought us tea, her hands shaking. He came here once, years ago, after Lila disappeared. He told me never to contact anyone from the past. Said if I did, bad things would happen. Hannah looked at her, fear clouding her eyes. Did he hurt you? Carol shook her head. No, but I never felt safe after that. I kept quiet. I'm sorry, Hannah. I didn't know how to help. I leaned forward. Do you know where Lila went? Is there any chance she's still alive? Carol's eyes filled with tears. I wish I knew. She talked about leaving, starting fresh somewhere no one knew her name. I hoped she'd made it. But after a while, I stopped believing. Hannah's voice was small. Did she love me? Carol smiled sadly. She loved you more than anything. She was just scared. We stayed for hours, piecing together fragments of Lila's life, her hopes, her fears, her desperation. Carol gave us a small box, filled with old letters, photos, scraps of paper with half-finished thoughts. As we left, Carol hugged Hannah tight. Be careful, sweetheart. He's not the man you think he is. The drive home was quiet. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind was spinning. If Lila had tried to reach me, why didn't I remember? Had Alan really manipulated both our lives so completely? When we got home, Alan's car was in the driveway. My stomach dropped. I told Hannah to go inside and lock herself in the bathroom if anything happened. She nodded, eyes wide with fear. I opened the front door. Alan was in the living room, sitting in the dark, the TV flickering with some mindless late-night show. He looked up as I entered, his face unreadable. Where were you? He asked quietly. I tried to keep my voice steady. Out, with a friend. He stood up, crossing the room in 3 strides. You never go out, not without telling me. His tone was soft, almost gentle, but there was a threat humming underneath. I met his gaze. People change. He studied me, searching for something. Who were you with? I thought of Carol's warning, the box of letters in my purse. You don't get to ask me that anymore. He stared at me, shocked. Then something shifted in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or rage. What have you done? I stepped back, suddenly aware of how small I felt in the doorway. What did you do, Alan? Where's Lila? Why did she write my name? He froze, his jaw clenching. For a moment, I thought he might lunge at me, but he just laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. You have no idea what you're talking about. I moved past him, keeping my eyes on his. No, but I'm about to find out. I went to Hannah, who was trembling in the hallway. I pulled her close, whispering, It's going to be okay. I won't let him hurt you. I promise. I could feel Alan's eyes on us, burning with secrets. I realized then that everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my past, it was all built on sand. But I wasn't going to run. Not this time. I was going to dig until I found the truth, no matter how deep I had to go. Women Unwritten, the night my husband's sister called me mom. Everything I knew about my family was a lie. Part 4. Docs. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I kept replaying Alan's laugh, thin, brittle, mean. He'd never laughed at me before, not like that. I lay in bed listening for his footsteps, my mind chasing itself in circles. Every time the house settled, I jolted awake, afraid it was him coming for me, or for Hannah. At some point, I must have drifted off, because I woke to sunlight slanting through the curtains and the sound of voices downstairs. I froze, heart in my throat. I crept to the landing, listening. Alan was on the phone, his voice low, tense. I caught only fragments. "No, she doesn't know anything. Just stay put. I'll handle it." Then the front door slammed, and silence settled over the house like a shroud. I hurried to find Hannah in the guest room, still curled up in bed, eyes wide and haunted. I sat beside her and handed her the box Carol had given us. We sifted through the contents together, piecing through old photographs, scraps of lined paper, letters with water stains and smeared ink. Each one felt like a key, but none quite fit the lock. One letter caught my eye. The handwriting was hurried, shaky. "Emma, if you ever read this, please know I tried. He changed after you left. He wouldn't let me talk to you. I'm sorry for everything. Don't trust him. Leela." The date at the top was from over 20 years ago. I read it aloud to Hannah, my voice trembling. "Do you remember anything about this? Did your mother ever mention me after she wrote this?" She shook her head. She stopped talking about the past. She said it was safer if we pretended none of it ever happened. I tucked the letter back into the box, my mind spinning. Why would Lila apologize to me? Why did she say, "after you left," when I had no memory of ever meeting her? My memories of college were faded. Faces, parties, laughter echoing in hallways, but nothing as sharp as this. Had Alan somehow edited me out of my own story? The idea sounded impossible, but I couldn't shake it. I decided to search the house. If Alan was hiding something, maybe he'd gotten sloppy. While Hannah showered, I crept into Alan's office. The room was always neat, everything in its place. But when I opened the bottom drawer, I found a folder tucked behind tax documents. My hands shook as I pulled it out. Inside were papers, old IDs, leases in different names, photographs of Alan with different women, different houses. There was a marriage certificate dated 3 years before Alan and I met, to a Lila Jennings. I stared at it, my vision blurring. He'd been married before. He'd never told me. Beneath the certificate was a letter, yellowed with age. My name was written at the top in Lila's handwriting. "Emma, I hope you never have to read this. If you do, it means I failed. He never forgave you for leaving him. He said you ruined everything. I'm sorry. I wish I could have been brave like you." My breath caught. Brave like me. But I didn't remember any of this. I didn't remember leaving Alan, or Lila, or anyone. I heard the shower stop. I quickly tucked the papers back, memorizing every detail. I needed time to process, to make sense of it all. I left the office and met Hannah in the hallway, her hair damp, her eyes searching mine. "Did you find anything?" she whispered. I nodded, leading her to my bedroom and closing the door. I told her everything I'd found, the marriage certificate, the letters, the photos. Her face twisted with a mix of hope and dread. "Do you think my mother is still alive?" she asked, voice barely audible. I didn't know how to answer. Part of me wanted to promise her that we'd find Lila, that all the missing pieces would fall into place. But another part of me, the part that had been lied to and manipulated for years, knew better than to offer false hope. "We're going to find out," I said instead. That afternoon, while Alan was still gone, I called the phone number listed on the old marriage certificate. It rang and rang, then disconnected. No voicemail, no answer. I tried searching the names online. Lila Jennings, Alan Jennings, Emma Harris. Fragments surfaced. Public records, property sales, a newspaper clipping about a woman reported missing in 2004. The woman's name was Lila Jennings. Missing. Not dead. My hands shook as I read the article. Local woman, age 27, last seen at her residence. Husband claims she left voluntarily. No evidence of foul play. There was a photo, a younger Lila, smiling at the camera, her arm around a little girl who looked just like Hannah. I printed the article and showed it to Hannah. Tears welled in her eyes. She didn't leave me, she whispered. He made her disappear. The realization hit me like a wave. Alan had built his entire life on lies. He'd erased Lila, rewritten his own history, and somehow wrapped me into it. Maybe I was never meant to remember. Maybe that's how he wanted it. That evening, Alan came home early. He seemed agitated, pacing the kitchen, snapping at nothing. I watched him, a cold weight in my chest. "We need to talk," I said finally, my voice steady. He looked at me, eyes narrowed. "About what?" I took a deep breath. "About Lila. About your first marriage. About Hannah." He went still, every muscle tensed. "You don't know what you're talking about." I stood my ground. "I know enough. I know you lied to me. I know you told Hannah her mother was dead. I know Lila is missing, and you're the last person who saw her." His face twisted, something dark rising behind his eyes. "Stay out of things that don't concern you, Emma." I felt a surge of anger, sharp and hot. "They do concern me. You dragged me into this. You made me part of your lies. I want the truth, Alan. All of it." He laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. "You're not ready for the truth." I clenched my fists. "Try me." He stared at me, silent. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the wheels turning. For a moment, I wondered if he'd confess, if he'd finally lay his secrets bare. But he just turned away, his voice flat. "Drop it, Emma. For your own good." I watched him walk out the back door, slamming it behind him. My whole body shook, but I didn't cry. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Hannah appeared in the hallway, her face pale. "Is he going to hurt us?" I hugged her tight, feeling the tremor in her limbs. "Not if I can help it. We need to get out of here. Tonight." We packed in silence. Essentials, the box of letters, the photograph, a handful of cash I'd stashed years ago for emergencies. Every minute felt stolen, every sound a threat. We waited until Alan's car left the driveway, then slipped out the back door. The air was sharp with autumn, the leaves crackling under our feet as we hurried to my car. As I started the engine, I looked at Hannah, her face lit by the dashboard's pale glow. "Do you trust me?" She nodded, her eyes shining with tears. "You're the only person I trust." I squeezed her hand, heart pounding. "We're going to find your mother, and we're going to make sure Alan can never hurt us again." We drove into the night, the road unwinding ahead of us, shadows stretching long and thin. I didn't know where we were going, only that we couldn't go back. As the city lights faded behind us, I felt something shift inside me. Fear? Yes, but also a fierce determination. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting back, and I wasn't alone. Women Unwritten, the night. My husband's sister called me Mom. Everything I knew about my family was a lie. Part 5. Docks. We drove for hours, the landscape shifting from city lights to lonely stretches of dark highway. Hannah sat beside me, curled into herself, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring at the headlights slicing through the night. I kept glancing at her, fighting the urge to reach out and smooth the hair from her face, to promise her we'd wake up from this nightmare. But I knew better than to make promises I couldn't keep. After a while, I pulled off at a rest stop. The place was nearly empty, just the drone of a vending machine and the fluorescent lights humming overhead. I killed the engine and turned to Hannah. "We can't go back," I said quietly. "Do you understand? Even if he calls, even if he says everything's fine, we can't trust him." She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin, determined line. "I know. I'm scared, but I know." I reached into my bag and pulled out the old photograph of Lila, Alan, and the child with Hannah's eyes. "This is all we have to go on. If your mother really is alive, someone must know where she went. Someone besides Alan." We sat there for a moment, the silence thick and heavy. Finally, Hannah spoke. Carol might know more. She always seemed afraid to say everything. It was a risk, but I pulled out my phone and dialed Carol's number. She answered on the second ring, voice trembling. Emma? Is that you? It's me. We left. Alan knows we're digging. Is there anything else you haven't told me? Please. Anything about where Lila could have gone? A pause, then a shaky breath. There was a place she always talked about, a little town near the coast, where her grandmother had a cottage. She said if she ever disappeared, she'd try to get there. I don't know if she made it. I haven't heard from her in years. The town's name spilled from Carol's lips, familiar in the way old stories sometimes are. I thanked her, promised we'd be careful, and hung up. Hannah watched me, hope flickering in her tired eyes. Do you think she's there? I don't know, I said honestly, but it's the only lead we have. We drove through the night, stopping only for gas and bad coffee. Hannah dozed off, her head against the window, the photo clutched in her hand. I drove on, heart pounding, every pair of headlights behind us setting my nerves on edge. I half expected Alan to appear in the rearview mirror, his face twisted with anger, but we saw no sign of him. As dawn broke, we reached the outskirts of the coastal town, a scattering of clapboard houses, tangled dune grass, the gray wash of ocean beyond. I parked near the faded sign that read, "Welcome to Elmridge," and took a shaky breath. We checked into a small motel under a fake name. The room smelled of salt and old linens, but it felt safe enough. Hannah lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, while I paced, clutching the photograph and the box of letters. Maybe we should ask around, Hannah said quietly. Someone might have seen her. It was risky, but we had nothing left to lose. We wandered the main street, stopping at the bakery, the general store, the post office. I showed the photo of Lila to anyone who'd look, spinning a story about searching for a lost friend. Most people shook their heads, but a few recognized her. That's Lila, isn't it? An elderly woman at the bakery said, squinting at the picture. She came through a few years back, looking for the old Jenkins cottage. Sweet girl. Haven't seen her in a long time, though. A glimmer of hope lit in my chest. Do you know where the cottage is? She pointed down a winding road toward the cliffs. It's empty most of the year. Folks say it's haunted, but I never believed that. We drove out to the edge of town, the sea wind buffeting the car. The cottage sat at the end of a rutted drive, weathered shingles and a sagging porch. My hands shook as I got out, Hannah just behind me. We walked up to the door. I knocked, heart in my throat. No answer. I tried the handle, locked. But as I stepped back, I noticed footprints in the sand leading around the side. We followed them to the back, where a small garden struggled against the salt air. There, bent over a patch of wild roses, was a woman with hair the color of honey, streaked with silver. She looked up, eyes wide with fear. For a moment, I saw the girl from the photograph, older now, thinner, but unmistakable. Hannah gasped. Mom? The woman stared at us, frozen. Then, slowly, she straightened and pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Hannah? She whispered. Her voice cracked, raw with disbelief and hope. They ran to each other, collapsing into an embrace so fierce and desperate it made my heart ache. I stood back, tears stinging my eyes, watching them cling to each other as if trying to make up for all the lost years. When they finally pulled apart, Lila looked at me. Her gaze searched my face, recognition flickering, then confusion. I know you, she said softly, but I can't remember how. My throat tightened. I found your letters, the ones you wrote to me. I don't remember either, but I think Alan made sure of that. At the mention of his name, Lila's face darkened. She led us inside, bolting the door behind her. The cottage was small, cluttered with books and old photographs, the air heavy with the scent of salt and tea. We sat around the kitchen table, hands wrapped around chipped mugs, and Lila began to tell her story. How she'd met Alan, how he'd swept her away, how the fear grew until it crowded out everything else, how she'd hidden money, waited for a chance, run in the middle of the night with only what she could carry, how she'd left Hannah with Carol for safety, then vanished. "I tried to find you," she said to me, voice breaking. "I tried to warn you, but he always knew where I was, what I was doing. I think he was watching us both." My mind reeled. "But why me? Why erase my memories?" She shook her head. "He hated what we had. The friendship, the hope. He wanted to be the only thing in our lives. I think he found a way to keep us apart, to make us forget." The weight of it settled over me. A lifetime of questions, of missing pieces, all falling into place. I looked at Hannah, her head on her mother's shoulder, her eyes finally softening. For the first time in a long time, I let myself believe we might be safe. But as night fell and the wind rattled the old cottage windows, I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Alan was still out there, and men like him don't let go of their lies so easily. Still, I looked at the two women beside me. One young, one world-weary, both scarred but unbroken, and felt something fierce rising in my chest. He'd taken enough from us. Whatever came next, we would face it together. Women Unwritten, the night. My husband's sister called me Mom. Everything I knew about my family was a lie. Part 6. Docks. The cottage was small, but that night it felt like a fortress. Lila locked every window, checked each door twice. Hannah hovered close to her mother, afraid to let go even for a moment. I watched them, feeling a sharp ache, relief for their reunion, and a deep, gnawing guilt for all the years lost in Alan's shadow. We tried to eat, but no one had much appetite. Lila made tea and told us what she could remember, but so much of her past with Alan was shrouded in fear, gaps, and fragments, as if she'd lived underwater for years. She'd kept records, journals, receipts, old photos, and she showed them to me, her hands trembling as she traced each memory. He followed me everywhere. Even when I thought I'd escaped, I'd find little signs, a wilted flower on the porch, a newspaper folded the way he liked. I never felt safe. Hannah clung to every word, desperate for scraps of her childhood. "Did you leave because of me?" she asked, voice small. Lila's face crumpled. "No, sweetheart. I left because I wanted you to grow up without fear. I thought I was protecting you." She stroked Hannah's hair and whispered, "I'm so sorry." The guilt on both their faces was almost too much to bear. I tried to give them space, stepping out onto the porch for air. The night was cold, the ocean a distant hush. I watched the moon trace silver on the waves and wondered how much of my own life I'd lost to Alan's manipulations. Eventually, Lila joined me. She sat beside me, wrapped in an old quilt. For a while, we just listened to the night. "I used to dream about this place," she said. "When things were bad, I'd close my eyes and pretend I was here. Safe." I swallowed hard. "Do you remember writing to me? The letters? I wish I could remember you. I wish I could remember any of it." She nodded, a sad smile on her lips. "You were my best friend, my anchor. But Alan, he was jealous. He wanted to be everything to everyone. I think, in his own twisted way, he loved us both. That's what made him so dangerous." The words hit me with a force I hadn't expected. "Did you ever think he'd hurt you? Really hurt you?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not at first, but near the end, I didn't know what he was capable of. I just knew I had to run." We sat in silence, letting the past breathe between us. Inside, I heard Hannah's soft laughter, thin, uncertain, but real. For the first time, hope didn't feel like a lie. The next morning, I woke to Lila bustling around the kitchen, making eggs and humming under her breath. Hannah looked lighter, almost younger, as if being near her mother was rolling back the years of fear. But peace never lasts. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. My heart hammered as I answered. Emma, it's Carol. You need to be careful. Alan came to my door this morning. He was asking questions. About you, about Hannah. He said you'd stolen something from him. I lied, but I think he knows you're gone. My voice shook. Did he threaten you? She paused. Not directly. But he's angry, Emma. He said, tell her to come home, or she'll regret it. Then he left. I'm scared for you. I thanked her, promised to keep her updated, and hung up. The fear I'd tried to push down came flooding back. Alan was looking for us, and he wouldn't stop until he found us. I gathered Lila and Hannah at the kitchen table and told them everything. Lila's face went pale. We have to go. He'll find us here. But I shook my head. We can't keep running. He's counting on our fear. We need to fight back. Hannah stared at me, eyes wide. How? I took a shaky breath. We have proof now. Lila's story, the marriage certificate, the letters, everything he's hidden. If we go to the police, if we show them what he did, they'll have to listen. Lila's voice was small. You really think they'll believe us? I looked at her, feeling the weight of every woman who's ever been doubted. They have to. We're not alone anymore. We spent the afternoon gathering everything. Documents, photographs, journals. Lila showed me a hidden compartment in the floorboards where she'd stashed evidence years ago. Bank statements, old restraining orders she'd tried to file, threatening notes in Alan's handwriting. I photographed everything, scanned the rest with my phone. Hannah helped, her hands steady as she arranged each piece on the table. He can't erase us anymore, she said, almost to herself. By dusk, we had a file thick enough to fill a banker's box. Lila looked at it, hope and fear warring in her eyes. If we go to the police, Alan will know. He'll come for us. I reached for her hand. Not if we get ahead of him. We go tonight. The nearest station is in town. We packed quickly, nerves wound tight. As we locked the cottage, Lila lingered on the porch, eyes shining with tears. I never thought I'd come back here and not feel afraid. I squeezed her shoulder. You're not alone anymore. We drove into town, headlights cutting through the mist. The police station was small and sleepy, the kind of place where nothing much happens. I felt my heart thudding as we walked inside, file box clutched to my chest. The officer at the desk looked up, startled by our urgency. I told him we needed to speak to someone about a missing person, a cold case, and about an ongoing threat. I showed him the file, my hands shaking. He called in a detective, a woman named Ramirez. She listened as Lila told her story, how Alan had controlled her, how she'd escaped, how he'd lied and covered her tracks. Ramirez took notes, her face impassive but kind. When we finished, she flipped through the evidence, her brow furrowing. This is a lot, she said. I need to verify some things, but it's clear you've been living in fear. We'll put a watch on the cottage, and if Alan shows up, we'll be ready. Relief warred with anxiety. Was this enough? Would Alan slip through the cracks, or would justice finally catch up? Ramirez arranged a safe place for us to stay, a shelter for women, out of town, quiet and hidden. It wasn't much, but it was safe. We spent the night in a tiny room, 3 narrow beds pushed together. Hannah fell asleep holding Lila's hand, and I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever feel truly safe again. The next morning, Ramirez called. We have Alan in custody. He showed up at the cottage last night, angry, shouting your names. We picked him up before he could break in. He's being questioned now. I felt my knees give out, relief and terror flooding me all at once. Will he go to jail? Ramirez's tone was gentle but cautious. It's not that simple. He's a master at twisting the truth. But we have your evidence and your testimony. We'll fight for you. All of you. I thanked her, barely able to speak. When I told Leela and Hannah, they clung to each other, sobbing with relief. I sat beside them, letting the fear ebb away in slow, painful waves. For the first time since this nightmare began, I let myself hope that the story might have a different ending, that the women Alan tried to erase might finally have their voices heard. Women Unwritten, the night. My husband's sister called me Mom. Everything I knew about my family was a lie. Part 7. Docs. After years of living in the shadows of someone else's lies, the quiet of that shelter felt almost holy. The windows were small, but sunlight still managed to slip through, warming the pale blue walls and the rough wool blankets. It was nothing like home, but it was a place where I could finally breathe without listening for Alan's footsteps behind every door. The detective, Ramirez, met with us again that morning. She brought news. Alan was in a holding cell, still spinning stories, denying everything. He claims you're all hysterical, that you ran away and made it up to punish him, Ramirez said, her eyes sharp but not unkind. But your file is strong. We're working to corroborate every detail. I nodded, trying to absorb it all. Lila's hand slipped into mine under the table. Her grip was stronger than I expected, the grip of a woman who's learned how to hold on even when everything else falls apart. Hannah sat beside us, her head high, her eyes clearer than I'd ever seen them. Ramirez explained the next steps: interviews, statements, paperwork. It sounded so ordinary, but for us it was monumental. We weren't running anymore. We were telling the truth. We were finally being heard. The next few days blurred into a rhythm of questions and answers, retelling our stories over and over. Lila and I gave our statements separately, but sometimes our memories overlapped. Certain smells, a song on the radio, the way Alan would change the subject if the past came too close. I found myself remembering flashes of college, a girl with honey hair laughing in the sunlight, notes passed under dorm doors, late-night phone calls. I'd forgotten her, or maybe Alan had helped me forget. Now the memories came back in fragments, painful but precious. Hannah struggled the most with the interviews. She'd spent so long doubting her own memories that speaking them aloud felt like walking barefoot across broken glass. But every time her voice shook, Leela would squeeze her hand and I would nod encouragement from across the table. One afternoon, after a particularly long interview, Ramirez pulled me aside. "There's something I want to show you," she said, leading me to her office. She sat behind her desk and slid a folder toward me. This was found in Alan's car. Inside were photographs, some old, some recent. There were pictures of me, Lila, even Hannah, taken from a distance. Walking to work, shopping, sitting in parks. There were pages of notes in Alan's slanted handwriting. Where she eats, who she talks to, when she's alone. A cold wave of nausea rolled through me. Ramirez's voice was gentle. "He's been following you for years. Not just you, Lila and Hannah too. I believe he's been planning something for a long time. But now you're safe." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The realization that Alan's reach had stretched so far, even as I'd tried to live a normal life, made me feel both furious and violated. But it also made me more determined. He would not win. Not this time. In the shelter, the three of us grew closer. Lila and I spent long hours talking. About the past, about what came next. She apologized over and over for not finding me sooner, for not being strong enough to fight Alan. I told her I understood. We'd both survived in the only ways we knew how. One night, while Hannah slept, I found Lila in the small communal kitchen, staring into her mug. "You know," she said softly, "for years I blamed myself. I thought if I'd just been smarter, if I'd left sooner, None of this would have happened. I sat beside her, resting my chin in my hands. I thought the same. I thought I should have noticed, should have seen through him. But that's what men like Alan do. They make you doubt yourself, question your instincts. They're experts at hiding. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I wish I could get those years back for Hannah. For you. I reached for her hand. We have each other now. That has to count for something. The next day, the district attorney called us in for a meeting. It was a drab office, file cabinets lining the walls, but the woman behind the desk was brisk and confident. She laid out the plan. Alan would be formally charged with fraud, stalking, and obstruction of justice. Lila's missing person case would be reopened. If all went well, he'd be held without bail until trial. Hannah sat quietly through the meeting, but on the way out, she stopped me in the hallway. "Will he ever stop?" she whispered. "Will he ever just let us be?" I crouched down so we were eye to eye. He doesn't get to decide what happens to us anymore. He can try, but he won't win. Not with all of us together. She nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. The waiting was the worst part. Days ticked by, slow and heavy. Alan's lawyer tried everything, painting us as unstable, insisting there was no evidence of abuse. But with every attempt to twist the truth, our evidence held strong. We attended the preliminary hearing together. The courtroom was cold, the fluorescent lights harsh. Alan stood in a suit at the defense table, looking smaller than I remembered, like a man whose power was slipping through his fingers. For a moment, our eyes met. There was no remorse there, just the flat, cold calculation I'd seen the night he laughed at me in the living room. Lila squeezed my hand. Hannah sat between us, stiff and silent, but she didn't flinch when Alan looked her way. When the judge read out the charges, Alan barely reacted. But I felt something lift from my shoulders, a weight I'd carried for years. The truth was out. He couldn't erase us anymore. Afterward, the prosecutor met us outside. "You did well," she said, looking each of us in the eye. "He's going to fight, but you're stronger than you think." That night, back at the shelter, Lila cooked a simple meal. We ate together, passing bread and soup, and for a little while, we were just women around a table, sharing stories, building something new from the ashes of what we'd lost. In the darkness, I held Hannah as she drifted off to sleep. Lila watched us, her eyes wet with gratitude and sorrow. I thought about all the other women whose stories had been erased, whose voices had been silenced. We weren't alone. We never had been. And as I lay awake, listening to the hush of the shelter and the steady breathing of the women I loved, I realized that even in the aftermath of so much pain, hope could take root. We were writing a new story now, one Alan could never touch. Women Unwritten, the night. My husband's sister called me Mom. Everything I knew about my family was a lie. Part 8. Docs. The days that followed were both a test and a kind of fragile miracle. Every morning I woke expecting to feel Alan's shadow stretching over us, but instead, it was the sunlight that spilled across the blankets. I watched Hannah and Lila fall into a rhythm that should have always belonged to them. Morning tea, quiet conversations, small laughter over old jokes. I saw them reclaiming something I thought was gone forever. The ordinariness of family. But the world outside the shelter didn't slow down just because we needed it to. The court date loomed closer, and with it came the anxiety that maybe, somehow, Alan would find a way to slither out of consequences. I rehearsed my statement in my head at night, words tripping over each other, fearing I would forget everything when it mattered most. One afternoon, as rain streaked the window, Detective Ramirez called us in for another meeting. She laid out the evidence in crisp, methodical order. Every forged document, every threatening note, every photo Alan had taken. She told us, "The prosecution is strong, but you need to be prepared. Alan's defense will try to make you doubt what you know. They'll try to drag up your past, find cracks, question your memory. Lila's jaw clenched. He's already taken so much. He doesn't get to take the truth, too. Ramirez nodded. That's exactly why you need to hold on to it. When you're in that courtroom, just remember, your story matters. The facts matter. You're not alone. The night before the trial, I barely slept. Hannah woke from a nightmare and crawled into my bed, her small arms wrapped tight around my waist. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. We stayed like that until dawn, hearts thudding in the same rhythm. The courthouse was a gray block of stone and glass. Inside, everything echoed. Heels on tile, hushed voices, the rustle of legal pads. I felt exposed, as if everyone could see the years I'd spent believing Alan's version of things. I held Lila's hand, and she squeezed back, grounding me. Alan sat at the defense table, flanked by his lawyer. He looked polished and composed, but there was a twitch in his jaw I'd never seen before. I realized, with a jolt, that he was afraid. Maybe for the first time. The prosecution laid out our story, piece by piece. They showed the judge the threatening notes, the years of tracking and control, the marriage certificate Alan had hidden, the records of Lila's disappearance. Each photograph, each letter, was like a brick in a wall I'd never thought we could build. Then it was our turn. Lila went first. She stood straight, her voice low but clear, and told the story of her marriage to Alan. How love had curdled into fear. How she'd tried to leave. How he'd convinced the world she was unstable, even dead. She didn't cry, not once. She just told the truth. I followed her, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped my notes. I spoke about the phone calls in the night, about the photograph Hannah brought, about the letters from Lila that I'd found, how Alan had erased whole chapters of my life and made me doubt my own memories. For a moment, my voice faltered. But when I looked at Hannah, sitting in the front row beside Lila, something steadied me. I said, "For years I thought I was just forgetful, just too trusting. But the truth is, I was manipulated. Alan taught me to question my instincts, to believe his lies over my own eyes. He did the same to Lila, to Hannah. We are not hysterical. We are not unstable. We are survivors." The defense tried their best. They painted Alan as a loving husband, a misunderstood man who'd simply wanted to protect his family. They brought up old emails I'd sent Alan years ago, pleading, apologetic, the words of a woman desperate to make her marriage work. The lawyer asked, "Isn't it true you were sometimes confused, forgetful, even unstable?" I stared him down and said, "Only after years of being gaslit and lied to by your client." The judge listened. He asked questions. He read every document, studied every photograph. The hearing lasted all day, but by the end, I saw something change in his eyes, a flicker of understanding, of belief. Alan never spoke. He sat with his arms crossed, his face growing tighter as the day wore on. When the judge called for a recess, I collapsed onto a bench outside the courtroom, spent and shaking. Lila sat beside me, her hand finding mine. Hannah leaned her head on my shoulder. For a moment, we just breathed together, a small island of calm in the storm. That night, back at the shelter, we waited for the verdict. I tried to distract Hannah with stories from my own childhood, summers at the lake, the smell of cut grass, the way my mother would hum as she cooked. Lila listened, and then shared her own. Silly things about Lila's and my college days, the pranks we pulled, the tiny rebellions that once made us feel invincible. "I wish I could remember more," I said, wiping away a tear. "But I'm grateful for what's come back, and for you." Lila hugged me, her arms warm and strong. "He can't take this from us, not anymore." Sometime after midnight, Ramirez called. Her voice was tired but triumphant. The judge issued an order. Alan's being held without bail until trial. "The DA is pushing for the maximum charges. You did it. You were heard." I let the words sink in, relief blooming so suddenly I laughed and cried all at once. I went to the little room where Hannah and Lila were curled up together, and I whispered the news. Hannah hugged me so fiercely I nearly lost my breath. Lila's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. That night, as I lay awake in the shelter's darkness, I realized something had changed inside me. I wasn't the woman who'd waited up for Alan, trusting his stories, shrinking to fit his moods. I was someone new, someone who believed in her own voice and in the voices of the women beside her. And for the first time in years, I drifted into sleep, unafraid. Women Unwritten, the night. My husband's sister called me Mom. Everything I knew about my family was a lie. Part 9. Docs. The days that followed felt lighter, as if the air itself had changed. The fear that used to curl around my heart in the quiet hours had loosened its grip. I found myself looking out the shelter window at the morning light, imagining a life not ruled by dread, but by possibility. Lila and Hannah began to talk about the future, about where they might live, what they might do, about growing herbs in a garden and painting walls any color they wanted. The world wasn't perfect. Alan was still awaiting trial, and his lawyer filed motions every other day trying to get him released, but each was denied. The evidence was too much, the judge too wary. We checked in with Detective Ramirez often, and every time she told us, "You're doing everything right. Just keep going. We're almost there." There were still bad days. Hannah had nightmares sometimes, waking in the dark calling for her mother, clinging to Lila with a ferocity that broke my heart. I woke sometimes with Alan's voice echoing in my mind, his laugh behind the door. But the difference now was that we weren't alone. I could walk down the shelter hallway and find Lila awake with tea, or Hannah curled up with a book. We made a home out of what we had. One afternoon, I found an old piano in the corner of the common room. I sat down and let my fingers drift over the keys, clumsy at first, then finding an old melody. Hannah crept over and sat beside me, watching. I played the song my mother used to hum while she cooked, and soon, Lila joined us, her voice soft and clear, the words filling the empty space with something like hope. We started making plans. Not big ones, not yet. But Lila applied for a job at a bookstore in town, and Hannah talked about starting at the local high school in the fall. I updated my resume, wondering what it would feel like to work somewhere without always looking over my shoulder. We went to the library, to the grocery store, to the park. Every little outing felt like a reclamation, a tiny rebellion against all the years Alan had stolen from us. A few weeks later, we got the date for Alan's trial. It would be public. People from the town would be there, and the press had picked up the story after the judge's ruling. At first, I was terrified. I didn't want my life dissected in front of strangers. I didn't want to see Alan's face again. But Lila sat me down, her eyes steady. "We have to finish this, Emma. Not just for us, but for every woman who's ever been made invisible." I nodded, tears prickling my eyes. "We'll do it together." The morning of the trial, the three of us dressed in the nicest clothes we owned. Lila in a navy sweater, Hannah in a yellow dress, me in a blouse I'd bought years ago and never worn, saving it for an occasion that never came. As we walked into the courthouse, I felt the weight of every step, but also the strength of the women beside me. Inside, the gallery was packed. Reporters with notepads, townspeople murmuring, the judge presiding with careful attention. Alan sat at the defense table, paler and thinner than I remembered, a man diminished. His eyes flickered over us, but there was no power in them now. He looked like someone caught in his own trap. The prosecution called Lila first. She spoke with a calm I envied, telling her story once more. How Alan isolated her, manipulated her, made her believe she was unsafe in her own skin. She showed the judge and jury the evidence, the marriage certificate he'd hidden, the threatening letters, the bank withdrawals, the forged documents. She spoke about the night she left, about the fear that had become a part of her. When it was my turn, I stood in the witness box and took a slow breath. I talked about the years with Alan, about the tiny ways he chipped away at my confidence, about the night Hannah called me Mom, and the world turned upside down. I told them how I'd doubted myself, how I'd been afraid, how I'd finally chosen to run. I handed over the box of letters, the photographs, the journals, evidence of lives Alan had tried to erase. The defense tried to rattle me, but I held steady. "Didn't you love Alan?" the lawyer asked, almost sneering. "Didn't you trust him?" "Yes," I answered, voice steady. "I loved him. I trusted him with everything. That's why his betrayal was so complete. That's why it was so hard to see the truth." Hannah took the stand last. She was the bravest of all, her voice soft but unwavering. She spoke of her mother's love, of the confusion and pain of being kept in the dark, of the fear that Alan would find her again. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated. We waited in a quiet room, hands clasped tight, barely breathing. Time seemed to stretch and warp, every second an eternity. When the bailiff finally came to fetch us, I thought my heart would burst. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Alan's face crumpled, not in remorse, but in shock. He looked around the courtroom, searching for someone to believe his story, but no one met his eyes. The judge sentenced him to the maximum allowed by law. There was no applause, no cheers. Just a hush, and the sound of Lila exhaling, her shoulders finally dropping. As we left the courthouse, reporters called our names, but we didn't stop. We walked out into the bright sunlight, blinking and dazed. Lila took Hannah's hand. I took Lila's. For the first time in years, there was nothing chasing us. No footsteps, no shadows, no lies. We drove home together, back to the shelter for one last night, but it felt different now. That night, as we lay side by side in the dark, I whispered to Lila and Hannah. "We did it. We're free." Hannah rolled over, her hand finding mine. "Can we go home now?" I closed my eyes, hope blooming in my chest. "Yes, sweetheart. Wherever we go next, that's home." Women Unwritten, the night. My husband's sister called me Mom. Everything I knew about my family was a lie. Part 10, Docs. We didn't leave the shelter right away. Freedom, I learned, wasn't just about walking out the door. It was about letting yourself believe you deserved to step into the sunlight. It took a few days for that truth to settle in. We spent them quietly, letting the relief move through us, letting the world feel ordinary again. I watched Hannah and Lila start to dream out loud. Hannah talked about painting her own room blue, and Lila wondered if she'd still remember how to make her grandmother's cinnamon rolls. I let myself think about a future too. One with laughter at breakfast, music drifting through open windows, a table set for 3. It's strange, the things that make you realize you're safe. For me, it was the first morning I woke and realized I hadn't dreamed of Alan, hadn't jerked awake with my heart racing. The sun was pouring through the window, and the room was quiet. No footsteps on the stairs, no threats lurking at the edge of my thoughts. I lay there for a while, just breathing, letting the moment fill every empty place inside me. We began to look for a place of our own. The 3 of us toured tiny apartments and weathered houses, laughing at the peeling wallpaper and making lists of what we wanted. A garden for Lila, a piano for me, a sunny window for Hannah to read by. The future didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be ours. One afternoon, we found it. A small house on a quiet street, with a crooked porch and wildflowers tangled in the front yard. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I remember the way Lila's eyes filled with tears when she turned the key in the lock. How Hannah spun in circles through the empty living room, her laughter echoing off the bare walls. We moved in with nothing but a few bags, a battered box of letters, and each other. The days settled into a gentle rhythm. Lila got the job at the bookstore, coming home every night smelling of paper and hope. Hannah started at her new school, making friends for the first time without having to hide who she was or where she came from. I found work at a community center, helping women who were just beginning the journey we'd survived. Every day, I saw pieces of myself in their stories, and every day, I felt myself growing stronger. Sometimes, the past would reach for us. A nightmare, a sudden noise, the memory of Alan's voice. But it never lasted long. We talked about him when we needed to, but we never let him take up more space than he deserved. We filled our home with new memories instead. Burnt toast, bad singing, books stacked in every corner, flowers picked from the yard. One evening, I stood in the kitchen watching Lila knead dough for cinnamon rolls. Hannah perched on the counter beside her, dusted with flour and beaming. The air was thick with the scent of sugar and yeast, and for a moment, I saw us as we really were. Scarred, yes, but unbroken. Women who had clawed our way back to the light. Lila caught my eye and smiled. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we'd never found each other?" I shook my head. "No, I can't afford to. We have now, and that's enough." She nodded, pressing her hands into the dough. "We're not the women he tried to make us, Emma. We're so much more." Later, after Hannah had gone to bed, Lila and I sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, listening to the summer night. We talked about forgiveness, about letting go. I realized I didn't need to hate Alan anymore. He was a chapter closed, a shadow that would never touch us again. "You saved me," Lila said quietly. I smiled, the old ache in my chest finally lifting. "We saved each other." Hannah's laughter drifted through the window, bright and clear. I looked up at the stars, feeling the weight of the years slip away. I thought about all the women still waiting for their stories to be heard, still searching for a way out of the dark. If you're listening, if you're stuck in someone else's story, know this: your voice matters. You are not invisible. You are not alone. One day, you'll step into the sunlight too. We locked the doors that night, not out of fear, but out of habit. And for the first time in so long, I fell asleep not as someone's secret or shadow, but as myself, whole, known, and finally free. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments.